Hi, folks. Earlier today, I had a very interesting chat with Nick Downing, who is a blacksmith based in southern Maine in the USA. Some of you know him already, some of you have probably heard the name, but for anyone unfamiliar, he is starting to provide custom cymbal hammers to anybody who wants them. He's also made mushroom dollies for a few cymbalsmiths. The world of cymbal making is quite new to him, so I thought I'd reach out and talk to him about where his work and our work cross over, what he understands about what we do, and maybe just if we can actually gain something from hearing his insight. So coming up now, but it's about a 45-minute chat, I think. There's lots of crossover in our work and also things that were new to me and things I need to dive into and we can work on together. So let's listen in. Nicholas K. Downing, welcome and thanks for joining me. You're based in southern Maine and you list yourself on your website as a blacksmith, a jeweler, and a custom metalsmith. And
Correct.
your name has been coming up quite a lot with my Patreon students and just people who join in to hear and read about cymbals. And it's because we're reaching out to you to make custom cymbal hammers. You've become a resource for that sort of thing. And so I know one of my students in particular reached out and asked for a cymbal hammer, and you made him one, and he's very pleased with it. But doing what we do, we need different, I mean, you'll understand this, we need different sizes for different applications, different weights.
Absolutely.
And he came to you and said, I want the same again, same weight. No, sorry, the same size face, but less weight. So that was your kind of challenge, maybe not so much of a challenge, but I just wonder if cymbal making is something that was on your radar and if this is the first time cymbalsmiths have reached out to you or if it's all kind of new to you and if you're a player yourself or anything like that.
Yeah, so this is all fairly new to me. I love music and I listen to music constantly, but I'm not especially musically inclined myself. Um, the way that I sort of got into this is I was making some of these small dog head hammers for metalsmiths and blacksmiths, and somehow Mike Mangiello of Mangiello Cymbal saw one of my hammers and put it together that it looked quite a lot like a traditional Turkish cymbal smithing hammer. And so he reached out to me about, making him some cymbal smithing hammers, and I was only too happy to give it a shot.
Cool.
And yeah, it's just kind of snowballed from there.
So do you have an idea now that people have started reaching out to you? Do you know what it is we're doing and you can apply the same sort of principles that inform your work to what you think we're doing, or was there a conversation with the people who reached out to you?
A certain amount of both. You know, just I mean, looking at the form of a cymbal itself, the way that they're, the radius is, the hat, if you will, all of that. I had done a certain amount of hollowware forming. I took some college classes back a few years ago on, making, things like vases and coffee pots out of, copper and brass and silver. And so that kind of sheet metal forming was something that I had a passing understanding of. But talking to cymbalsmiths such as yourself, having that dialogue about, I'm looking for something with this weight, I'm looking for something with this radius on the face, I need this much reach. Like reach, like being like how long it is,
Right.
the face from the handle.
Sure.
And also kind of other little subtleties, like it may be kind of hard to see in the camera, but this hammerhead nods down a little bit towards the handle, which kind of puts it, actually, if you were to draw a straight line, kind of puts it in line with where your hand is. And so just all of those little subtleties are things that I've been refining, and always happy to sort of accommodate customer requests, because that's the other thing, is that everybody's got kind of their own style, their
Right.
preferences.
Yeah. On the Patreon, I do a monthly Zoom meeting with anyone who wants to join in, any members, and we've done a couple now. And one thing that came up was the idea that the hammers that we use, I use a hammer. Mainly, I use just one hammer with a few extra little ones and slightly heavier ones. But the one I use is from one of the Turkish suppliers. It's very much a Turkish cymbal making hammer. But what came up in the discussion was the idea that actually, as you work, depending on what material you're using and how kind of into like hardening and stuff you are, the hammer faces actually start kind of shaping themselves in a way to kind of accommodate the way each different person works and strikes and attacks the metal. Personally, I quite like that because it leaves a sort of open-ended learning branch, if you see what I mean. But
yeah, well, no, it's funny you should bring that up actually. So the lighter hammer that I made for Timothy Roberts, that you mentioned earlier, that one actually came back to me because there was a slight problem with the tempering, so it ended up being a little bit too soft, and he would very graciously send it back, and I rehardened it. But when it came back to me, I noticed that it had, like, the flat that it had been created by him hammering was, towards the bottom a little bit. And so, like, I kept looking at that, and I was like, before I just go ahead and reharden this, do you want me to, like, actually bend that down a little bit so it strikes more in the center? And and that was a really cool kind of aha moment, because I got the feedback, like, looking at the tool and noticing that he was striking very, very consistently, but a little off center. And I was like, well, if we just adjust the hammerhead a little bit, maybe that'll it'll just make that just a little bit more efficient, just a little more comfortable. And and also if there's ever a misstrike, it's that much less likely that you're going to dig in with a corner or something. So
that's really interesting. Yeah. I think that would be the case with a lot of people's. Mine as well. It's the flattening off portion where I'm doing all the work is slightly below center. Again, I'm perfectly happy. I've had that hammer a long time, and I like the fact that my tools change to me and I change to them, and that's very much part of the process, and that's cool. But you say about aha moments, that's quite interesting as well, because I think as a cymbal maker, and I'm sure lots of the other people who've started cymbal making who are watching this will relate to this, there's a lot of trial and error, essentially, where you're, because obviously I'm not sort of comparing what you do and what we do in the same kind of playing field, but there's like the fact that you can hit the metal with a hammer and the bronze that we use, and then hit it with a stick and it just sounds off or wrong or something, and then you hit it in a different way and it sounds right, or and kind of figuring out what that even means in the first place. But a lot of it is aha moments. And you said about forming, like what was it, like vases and copper stuff. So one of the first videos when someone starts working with me, if they've got no experience, I'd point them to this video on YouTube about raising a copper vessel. It's very simple sort of thing, because myself as well, I'm entirely self-taught as a cymbal maker. And when I used to get the cymbal blanks, have you seen the cymbal blanks
I don't believe I have, actually.
Okay, I don't have one I can show you, but the people watching will be well aware, and I'll send you a picture or something. But they're just basically kind of gnarly discs of bronze, and you can choose to have the bell, like the central portion pressed in at the factory, or you can form that by hand. Anyway, when I started, and when a lot of people start, you just go on the underside and think, oh, I need to make a dome. I need to make. So what I'll do is I'll just go underneath and hammer the shape in magic, because then I'm curving it over. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, obviously, like compressing against anvil and hammer. But then by doing that, you're sort of, yes, it's bending the way you want it to, but it's also kind of raising around the hammer face or sinking around it in 360 degrees, and you end up with this tachoed kind of mess. You just go, what's going on? So anyway, long story short, what I do is I show people this video of the guy starts with a bit of copper and just raises a bowl on a very sort of makeshift anvil setup, and it's often a light bulb moment for people going, okay, you don't go underneath necessarily to make a curve that way. And then it sort of blossoms from there and the whole thing blooms. Anyway, what I'm getting to in my usual long roundabout sort of way is, does that strike a chord in your learning? Are there sort of elements that are upside down and perhaps against how you thought things might have worked, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So the question is, in my way of working, are there things that are sort of counterintuitive that I run into?
That's a much quicker way of asking it, but yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That
Just
is
making sure.
yeah.
Yes, definitely. I mean, in blacksmithing, there are just so many things where you look at something and think that looks impossible. Like, how did they do that? And then when you find out that it's just like you chase some lines in and you twist it, and it's just like, oh, okay. So yes, maybe not for the hammer making per se, but for a million other little aspects of the craft. Yeah, there are tons of tricks and just things that you'd never guess that they were done that way, and then but kind of after you have a certain amount of experience, you can look at something that looks impossible and be like, oh, okay, I see what they did there,
I know,
and that's always really exciting.
I know what you mean. I wondered as well, are you listening to the metal as you work it? Because
to some degree, I generally have ear protection in because it's loud, but yeah. And the thing is, I work with several different steels. The majority of the metal I work is just mild steel. It's just like weldable bar that you could get at Home Depot or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you're getting into high carbon steels and tool steels and alloy steels, there's a lot of subtlety. And so for me, it's kind of mostly visual. I'm looking at the incandescence of the steel to determine how I'm working it. But there are some outliers. There are some weird steels that I've played around with where they'll look hot enough and you'll hit it and it just won't move at all, and it's like, okay, there's something else going on here. And so it's back to the fire, or or potentially back to like the internet to figure out what the hell's going on.
yeah, I get you. The reason I ask is because cymbals need to reach a kind of sonic outcome, but aside from that, I'd personally say cymbal making is incredibly visual as well, because you start sort of dialing in, seeing what's happening, zoomed in and zoomed out in the area you're working on, but also the whole cymbal, how it's reacting and how the shape is building piece by piece. But what I've noticed, even with ear protection, is the sound of the strike of the hammer, depending on what's going on within the metal, if it's stiff or tense or tight or whatever, and you're obviously changing the shape as you're hammering. The shape change. I've got a kind of mantra, which is shape is sound, in what we do. It's like actually the hit of the hammer has a certain tone, and as you carry on working, that tone either rises or drops, and so I find that quite interesting. And that's before even hitting the cymbal and seeing what it sounds like as an instrument. You get that feedback. So well, actually,
you just reminded me of something a little bit, which is, and I'll try not to get too totally in the weeds here, which I'm prone to do, so feel free to reel me in.
Me too, but go for
it. So in blacksmithing, primarily you're working with hot metal, but that's not always the case. I mean, I set a lot of rivets cold. I do a lot of, file work, fitting, things like that, machining. And especially if you're talking about like traditional blacksmithing, like, pre-19th century technology stuff, you get a lot of work hardened springs on like latches and locks. And so that is just, it's the same metal that every other piece of the lock is made from, but it's hammered, it's work hardened essentially. And I imagine that's just exactly like with cymbalsmithing. You there's what it looks like visually, but there's also how it's responding, and so I'm sure you probably have to push a few cymbals too far and crack them to understand kind of where those limitations are. And it's very much like that with iron too.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So you say about work, obviously you work hot and cold, but
Yeah.
everything personally that I do is it's all cold work. So the
Mhm.
bronze, again, I don't know how much you know. I don't want to, tell you stuff you already know, but the bronze is a very specific alloy.
Yeah.
It's, B20, so 20% tin. There are other alloys as well, but that's the
Mhm.
main kind of high end stuff. But all the hot work's done in the production of the blanks. In my case, over in Turkey, just pits of fire in the ground and giant industrial rollers, and then
Wow.
quenching and all this kind of stuff. And then it arrives here crusty and raw,
Yeah.
and it's all cold work essentially. There are a
Yeah.
couple of cymbalsmiths out there. There's another guy in the UK called Matt Nolan who does really interesting cymbals, but a load of percussion and all sorts of interesting stuff. He built himself a tempering furnace. He's not far from me, so I've been to see it, and he's very, very knowledgeable and precise, and so he knows exactly what he's doing. I played with fire once on cymbals. Sorry, you
Well, I was wondering, so during the process of creating a cymbal, you don't ever anneal it?
personally? No.
Mm.
I think it's quite rare, really, that once you start the hammering, the shaping, and the lathing and
Yeah.
everything, it's rare to do that. There are people out there who will kind of blowtorch, maybe put the cymbal on the lathe and spin it and blowtorch it, and that has a certain kind of impact on the sound.
Sure.
Personally, I think it's a bit of a dodgy way to go because
Mm.
all the phases that the metal goes through. It's
Mhm.
when I played around with fire on some little things I made a long
Yeah.
time ago. I sold them and they sounded lovely and bright. And then someone wrote to me saying, it's really nice, but it just shattered spectacularly when I hit it. And let's not play with fire anymore until I'm ready,
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, yeah, try and keep it cold. I wanted to ask as well, do you think, like, obviously I get this, like you're saying, this is all kind of new to you, the cymbal smithing world, and you're not a cymbal maker, you say you're not really a musician as such, although you love music. Do you think there's anything we're missing in the way we work? Do you kind of look at us, or you're aware of us and go, why aren't you just doing this? Or why don't you try this technique or something?
Well, that is a really interesting question, and truthfully, I'm not sure I'm knowledgeable enough to answer it. But
Sure.
I really, when you were talking before about like syncing the bell, um, I just, I bet there's a lot to be gained by looking at other types of sort of sheet metal work.
Right.
Yeah. So like for, hang on a second, just 1 second.
Of course. Yeah.
I had my little bass sitting right on the shelf behind me, so I thought
Oh, nice.
So
Right.
this
That's
was
copper. Yeah.
this is red brass, I believe. So it's a brass with a higher alloy of copper.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So of course this started as a flat sheet, and and if you were to just sink this and sink this and sink this and sink this, eventually you would have stretched this thing so thin that it's gonna pop like a balloon.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you're forming your blanks, but like with this, there's a raising stake, I'm sure you're aware of, which is kind of an anvil that has an elongated heel on it that you put the metal on, and you sort of forge it a little bit at a time as you're turning it like a steering wheel,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just incrementally you're compressing it all the way around.
Yeah.
And
And it's sort
so
of following that surface and growing over it, sort of thing. Yeah.
well, kind of. I mean, what's really fascinating about the raising stakes is that they're really not mandrels. It's putting this piece of metal kind of in your face, and you're just kind of and it's very general. So you could make a shape like this, you could make a shape like a bowl, you could make a shape like a cymbal, you could make whatever you want,
Mm.
within reason. Obviously when you're getting into undercuts, there's some other tooling that you have to think about.
Yeah.
But just the idea of like, so sinking a bell, you're stretching it, versus when you're raising something, you're actually compressing it. It's getting thicker, as you work.
Okay. That's an interesting concept. I mean, I'll need to dig further into that and maybe maybe keep you talking for 8 hours at some point, because that's,
Yeah, sure.
I find that interesting, because the idea of making, you're sort of increasing surface area.
Hmm.
So how does thickness increase? What am I missing there?
Yeah, so it's the edges. The point at which you start is going to stay roughly the same,
Yeah,
but you have a radius of your disc, right? And that's decreasing, and that mass has to go somewhere, and so
yeah,
it condenses into itself.
yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I mean, there's a town in Mexico, Santa Clara del Cobre, where it's like this whole cottage industry of hollowware, of copper, um, hollowware. And I back a few years ago, I was at a blacksmithing conference in Delaware, and there were some smiths from there, the Puzo family, who brought their whole setup, and were making these just incredibly beautiful copper vessels. And they had one in the gallery that I'm sure it started as about like quarter inch, or like, I don't know, like 8 or 10 gauge copper disc. And
Yeah,
by the time they had formed this vase that was about, I don't know, 18 inches tall, the the edge that you could see was about, I don't know, like 3/8 to half an inch thick.
that's
Because
really interesting. That's
yeah,
amazing.
because
Yeah,
that metal had just compressed and compressed and compressed, and then
right.
until it was so thick.
Man, that's
Yeah,
fascinating. I
yeah,
that is gonna, I mean, you're blowing my tiny mind. That's gonna blow people's minds. That's amazing. Thanks.
yeah,
Very, very interesting. I'm gonna dig into that.
yeah,
What
sure,
what was, oh, I'll look, I'll obviously watch back, and I'll take the name of what you just said, and I'll post it in the
sure.
description and stuff. Wow. That's just kind of, yeah, I might need a moment to be honest. Do you do
Sure.
much work on bronze then?
When a little, I've
Yeah,
worked much more with brass.
sure.
Yeah, about 90% of what I do these days is iron.
Yeah,
In some capacity,
yeah.
whether it be tools or decorative stuff. So it's pretty unusual these days that I'm working with copper, brass, or bronze.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I had another thought too, just as you were talking about, like how like studying other techniques. It also came to mind when we were talking earlier about repoussé work, which
Oh yeah.
is mostly decorative.
Mm,
Plaques and things, reliefs, where
yeah.
someone is taking a sheet of brass or bronze, copper, silver, what have you, and creating a relief, like usually an image or something.
Yeah.
um, but I was looking at some of the like iron repoussé tools, and a lot of the hammerheads are curved, so it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with Timothy Roberts. And I had done some reading on that, and I found out that most of the time, if you're standing at an anvil, like I usually am, and you're doing some repoussé work, then your hammerhead is going to be straight. But
Hmm.
if you're sitting at an anvil, it's more ergonomic if it tilts, if it actually curves down a little bit.
Right. Is that to do with how you strike, essentially, I
Yeah,
guess?
I
How you
think
how
it's
you're coming to it?
because yeah, I think it's because when you're standing at an anvil, your elbow is going to be almost 90 degrees when the hammer hits. And
Sure.
when you're sitting at an anvil, the anvil tends to be higher. You're at your elbow is going to be at a more acute angle. And so having that curve means that you have to bend your wrist less to accommodate for that angle.
That
So
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
That's one thing I find it's good to discuss with people. A bit like drumming, really. When you start drumming, you alter the heights of the drums and the height you're sitting at, so that ergonomically you're able to be comfortable. Essentially, that's what it's all
Totally.
about, And
Yeah.
and one thing that surprises a lot of people is you think that this is whichever arm you use is your hammering arm. I'm right-handed, so my right arm is doing all the swinging and all the hammering, but
Hmm.
very often we're holding the edge of this disc of metal and rotating it as we go. it's very easy to finish hammering and then realize your hand's just locked, and before you know it, you're peeling your fingers away, you know, because just actually taking a moment for your sort of physicality and the way you sit to the anvil and swing and everything, and hammer technique with, you know, not just gripping and digging into the anvil, but kind of guiding the fall almost sometimes, you know.
Totally.
The thing I was going to ask actually that I forgot and have now remembered is, you said about, I asked you the question about, is there anything we're missing, do you think? And you said maybe looking at other disciplines or whatever. And that's, again, that's why I show this video of the copper vessel, because nothing to do with cymbals per se, but there's a technique there to be to draw from, you know. So what I recommend to folk is go and look at jewelry makers, go and look at car panel beaters, you know. You got the English wheel and planishing and all these things. We might not use them 100%, but there's something to learn at least in how the metal reacts to all these things. And even like, I just take cues from nature sometimes, you know. One story I tell, which, you know, people might wish I'd stopped telling it, but I was driving past a park and someone had a line lashed up between two trees to, you know, to tightrope across. And as they were getting to the center, I noticed the way their foot was imprinting in the middle of the line was creating this very specific kind of bend. And I thought, oh, I kind of see how putting the force in the middle of that line is creating this kind of flow towards the force, you know. And I kind of, in some small way, helped my idea of the flow of energy around a curved surface. And that, you know, just that sort of stuff does that relate as well? Do you think there's stuff in that? Do you sort of do you sort of look at a tree and go, oh, I've got an idea, you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. I mean, so many, especially if you're talking about like the decorative work there, you know, I mean, it's all, you know, there's so much that can be gleaned from, you know, looking at natural forms and, you know, and just, I mean, like the way things grow, the way things, you know, I mean, so much of it is biology and math and, just being open to seeing it, you know. I mean, totally. I mean, I definitely, I probably drive people crazy. I'll be someplace and I'll start doing this thing with my hands, and you know, and it's like some form has caught my eye or whatever, and I'm trying to like isolate it, or you know, see some, you know, some curve in it that I like, or something, and you know, and that's so, you know, sort of informative to my work.
I completely relate to that. The way I put it sometimes is you reach a point, certainly for me, while I'm self-taught, but I reached a point where I felt I could kind of see the matrix, you know.
Totally.
At one point something clicked and I could see the flow, I could almost see the sound, you know, I could see how it was going to sound, I could see what I put into the metal and what it was giving back energy wise. We talked about other disciplines, and briefly, you know, I said about, like, I tell people to go and look at jewelry makers and the way they hammer metal. You do jewelry yourself, so you do these, you know, intricate small pieces as well as big, like gates and stuff. Do you find that your technique has to kind of alter depending on what you're working on, if you see what I mean? So the reason you've got like a splash cymbal, for example, which can be 6 inches, even smaller if you want. And then ride cymbals, even, you know, gongs, 24, 25, 26 and up inches. And a lot of the principles are the same, but there's obviously this kind of reduction in or growth in what each hammer stroke counts, and counts differently depending on the size you're working on and the goal, the kind of goal you're aiming for. So working on a splash, for example, is a very different process to working on a giant 24-inch ride cymbal like one of these.
Right.
You know, obviously you're still applying force with the hammer, but you really have to change the way you kind of put it on the surface. So again, like, long way round of asking, jewelry versus gate or something. You know,
sure.
How does that kind of sit with technique wise?
Well, I mean, I love it, and I love that I am able to do both. And, I think being a jeweler has made me a better blacksmith, and being a blacksmith has made me a better jeweler.
Right.
I really love the dialogue between those two. And, kind of like what you're talking about earlier, it's like suddenly you can see the matrix. It's like there's a level of understanding, I think, where, you know, in some respects, the only thing that changes is the scale, but in some respects, everything changes because of the scale. Or
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So, I think that the jewelry work has given my ironwork an accuracy and a finesse, and I think that my ironwork has given my jewelry a looseness, and and an understanding of how the metal moves and can be manipulated
Is
that
that
I might
almost
not
like
have had.
sorry to jump
Go
in.
ahead.
I was just going to say, is that almost like an efficiency sort of thing, if that's not too cold a way of putting it,
Say again.
Is that almost like an efficiency? You say a looseness, so a
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
efficiency, if that's not too cold a way to put it.
No. I think so. Let me give you an example. So, um, you know, probably if you are making a wedding band, say if you're doing jewelry work and somebody wants you to make a ring, you'd get your metal, and it would come as this beautiful polished flat sheet of gold, silver, whatever, and you would take your jeweler saw and you would cut a strip of that, and then you would bend it around and solder it, and you have your band form.
Sure.
Because of my blacksmithing background, I could, rather than, going to a metal supplier and, buying this strip of, perfect metal, like, it wouldn't faze me one bit to look around my bench, find all my little scraps of the right material, melt it down into a little ingot with the torch, hammer it into a disc, punch a hole in it, and stretch it out until it's a band.
Right.
So the result is the same, but it's a totally different technique of getting there.
Right.
And if you are only familiar kind of with classic jewelry techniques, you might overlook that, I think. I could be wrong. I mean, it probably depends on the program, but just viewing the metal as supremely mutable, that you can start from scraps, or you can start from wire and end up with a sheet. You can start from an ingot and end up with a wire. You can start with dust and end up with a hinge, and it's just
Yeah.
just knowing all those techniques, knowing how it's going to move when you hit it, knowing how it's going to react. They're just there's a lot of subtlety to it,
Yeah.
and and I think the dialogue between the jewelry and the ironwork is is really great. And just to kind of reiterate, I think one informs the other, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting. A lot of very famous blacksmiths started out as jewelers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got any interest in making cymbals at all?
I do, but I also have a lot of interest in a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So, I don't really need another expensive hobby at this point.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I mean, I run it full time, and sometimes I feel like I don't need it. So
Yeah, sure.
I completely get it. But obviously, I'd say the vast majority, if not all, of people who come to cymbalsmithing is because they're drummers, and the ride cymbal in particular being the sort of generally bigger one that you ride through the song on, let's say, there's a lot of famous recordings with famous cymbal sounds, obviously made good by famously good players and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's very much a kind of there's this kind of mystique to them that people really like, but at the same time I think can go too far, this kind of gear lust kind of thing. So I try and keep it very real. This might be a bit of an out there question, but one thing, as someone who makes cymbals to commission, to order, and various other people do too, I get customers coming to me saying, I'd like a cymbal, please, and maybe here's an example or two. It needs to sound, and then it goes off into like needs to sound a little bit purple and a bit autumnal and like bit like my grandmother in the 50s, you know, and all this.
Yeah.
What do you
Oh, I
mean?
love
You
that.
know,
That's
and yeah,
great, man.
it's cool, but at the same time, like my job then is to interpret what that actually means to them. Even things like I want it to sound bright. It's like, well, what does we need to sort of agree what bright means, or what you think and what I think, and then either
Mm.
meet in the middle or I join you, you know. So
Hmm.
do you get people coming to you, for example, saying, I want I want a gate that reminds me of last Tuesday, or a piece of jewelry that's kind of happy, or you know?
Yeah, I'm um definitely.
Mhm.
It's probably not quite that out there,
Yeah.
but so often a client comes to me and they have a project and it's something I've never done before. And they have something in their brain and I have something in my brain. And, you know, I put something on paper, a sketch, a thumbnail, whatever, or they put something on paper, and then it's just, it's kind of trying to, through a dialogue, just, converge and meet on,
Yeah.
you know, what it is they want, um, within the parameters of what's possible and, budget.
Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't think I've ever had anyone ask me like, I want a gate that looks like purple, but I don't want the gate to be purple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But certainly just, I mean, but yeah, I mean, being able to communicate and being able to draw, are so critical
Yeah.
to this kind of work.
Yeah. It's, I guess with symbols, yeah, there's obviously communication, you know, and what I come back to a lot is, well, can you send me recordings? Can you send me videos?
Totally.
And then I can just get a frame of reference at least,
Hmm.
because yeah, the communication thing, if it's words alone and then you're presenting this sound, essentially, it's instantly moved from one lexicon to another. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, trying to get those two to meet. Um, cool. Man, this has been absolutely stunning and interesting and revealing as well. So I thank you so much. Your website is, you want to just give us a
Yeah,
few
it's
details where we can reach you?
sure. So I'm on Instagram as Downing Arts. I'm on Facebook as Downing Arts, and I'm on the interwebs as downingarts.com. So
Cool. I'll pop all
yeah,
that in the descriptions and everything. And yeah, if I take it if people come to you and say, I'd like a cymbal hammer, please, then you're very much open to that.
indeed. Yeah, or I mean anything else. I mean I've
Yeah.
started to branch into even some other tools for cymbalsmiths. I've made a couple of bell anvils at this point, or mushroom
Oh yeah.
stakes.
Yeah, cool, cool.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Throw it at me. I mean,
Great.
the worst that's going to happen is I'll say no, no thanks.
Is there anything else
Usually
coming
that's
your
not the
way?
intent.
Anything else niche that people are coming to you with? Any other kind of
Oh my
crazy
gosh, yeah.
requests?
Well, so I mean, the symbol smithing thing is relatively new to me, but I mean, my main area of interest is making tools for other craftsmen. I first started blacksmithing when I was 13 or 14 because I really wanted to make a knife, and I think that's really common for a lot of young men. They're like want to make a knife or a sword or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and I realized that there was just, there was so much to it and there were so many different avenues to it. And, I'm a general smith, so I do a certain amount of decorative work, but my passion is making tools for other craftsmen.
Mm.
And so whether it be cymbal smithing hammers or here's a bowl ads that I'm sending out today.
A what?
You
Sorry.
know,
A
a
bowl.
bowl ads.
Okay.
So it's a carving tool. It's basically a gouge,
Oh,
set
right.
90 degrees to a little handle. So you use that to shape a bowl.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Cool.
yeah. So I mean, um, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
so
Talking
so
about the
niche.
niche kind of stuff.
Yeah, niche tools are the thing that is really gets my juices flowing. So making especially like edge tools. I make a lot of tools for wood carvers and timber framers.
Mm.
Um, and but yeah, I mean, whatever. If you're a craftsperson and you're looking for some kind of, obscure tool or a tool that hasn't been invented yet, then like, yeah, reach out. I'm happy to give it a shot. So
Awesome, man. Great. Anything else you want to add? I think we've had a real cool chat. It went on longer than I thought, which is a very good thing.
excellent.
I'm amazed at how much kind of partially amazed, and also it makes sense. There's a lot of crossover, I think, in the approach to work and the reaction of the materials and
Yeah, totally.
application of force and stuff. But yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add that you'd like to throw out there for yourself, or
Oh my gosh, I think we could easily talk for hours, but
sure,
I don't. That's probably not necessary. But I guess the only other thing that we touched on very cursorily that I think might be worth a brief mention is ergonomics, because I think that's probably really important to both of our crafts.
right?
Just I noticed a lot of cymbalsmiths are wrapping their handles with like tennis tape.
Yeah, it's exactly where my mind was just going as you said it. 'Cause my Turkish hammer just came. It's just not shaped handle at all, just a cylinder of wood.
Yeah.
And I just kind of worked with it for a long time, and I realized
Yeah.
I was having to grip and it was slipping. And I'm
Mm.
very much like, I just bash it together and learn to work with it as I go. That's how I've gotten
Mhm.
where I've gotten, and that's fine. But at the same
Totally.
time, I do make life hard for myself, because I just suddenly thought, why don't I just at least wrap it in the tennis stuff and it's better? But
Sure.
are you saying that what's your angle with the kind of wrapping with the tennis stuff? Do you mean that's
Oh,
kind of
well, I guess I was just gonna say, if you are repetitively swinging a hammer, make sure it's comfortable.
sure?
Um, don't be afraid to get out a rasp and shape your hammer handle. You
Okay.
shouldn't be putting a death grip on your hammer handle.
Yeah.
Um, if someone could stop time, mid-stroke, they ought to be able to pluck that hammer out of your hand pretty easily.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so just things to pay attention to. I know it looks like you're kind of a slight guy. I'm kind of a slight guy. I try to pay a lot of attention to, the height of my anvil. I try to make sure that I'm not, I have one shoulder way up all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I think shaping your hammer handle is a really big one. If you're getting those traditional Turkish hammers, I've seen a lot of them that have a round eye and a round
Yeah.
handle,
Yeah.
and you're exerting way too much force if you're trying to keep that hammer going in a straight line. You should make that thing, rectangular or an oval shape and cross section, but don't leave it round, because that is just
The
going to lead
the
to
handle itself.
problems in your wrist and elbow. Yeah,
You mean that the handle itself? Yeah.
yeah. Like
Oh
it should
man,
be. It shouldn't be round. It should be.
that's
It
very
should be
cool.
an oval. Yeah,
Man, that's really
or a rectangle. Yeah,
yeah, that's really
yeah.
useful.
So that's
Thanks.
huge. Yeah,
That's
yeah, and
really
also, I mean,
interesting.
pay attention to the weight too.
Mm,
If you feel like it's too heavy, you're putting too much strain on your shoulder. If you feel
yeah.
like it's too light, you're putting too much strain on your elbow, whipping it down. So,
Yeah.
try to find what feels comfortable.
Yeah.
So,
Man, that's gold. That's really cool. Thanks. Yeah.
cool.
I think that might be where a lot of people we I'm dragging this on a bit now, but we concentrate a lot on the shape of the anvil and the shape of the actual hammer face, and what happens when these two generally curved surfaces squash a piece of metal between it, and if you alter the curve of one or both, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
actually, the handle itself, because it's you swinging the thing and having to stay comfortable and control it. So yeah, I think that's really useful for everybody to remember,
Yeah.
including myself. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yes.
That's way
Yeah. You
cool.
bet.
Thank you. Cool. Well, look, man, this has been really good. Yeah, we kind of arranged this at the last minute, but I'm really happy. Thank you so much for joining me. And
It's my pleasure.
yeah, we'll see what people come back with. I'm sure there's lots in there. So thanks. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.